Hello, welcome to the Viking Initiative for Building Excellence. I'm Eddie and I will be teaching the SAT. Now, for today's lesson, we'll be starting off by going over introduction to the SAT and tips for taking the SAT. The objectives for today's lesson will be to firstly understand the purpose and the essence of the SAT, and also to learn important strategies when taking the SAT. First of all, it's very important to understand what the SAT is. The SAT is used in standardized testing for college admissions in the United States as well as in other countries. Most colleges will evaluate test scores for applicants as part of its comprehension admissions process, so that means having a high SAT score is extremely advantageous. SAT and ACT scores for universities can be found online and generally aim to score around the 75th percentile of your target university for the best chance of admissions. Some examples of the SAT scores for top national universities are listed here. As you can see, you have their acceptance rate, the 25th percentile SAT, and the 75th percentile SAT. Now, the 25th percentile means that 25% of people score below this mark, and the 75th percentile means that 75% of people score below this mark. So, if you want the best chance, you should aim to have a score around the 75th percentile. So, why do you need to take standardized testing? There are many reasons why it's very encouraged for you to take standardized testing like the SAT. And the first reason is that it's an easy way to prove that you're academically ready for college. Even if you aren't in the top percentile of your graduating class, you can still prove to colleges that you're academically competitive with just one test because it directly compares you with other students. It's also very useful for scholarships and summer programs because many state universities give scholarships to those with high GPAs and SAT or ACT scores, so it's certainly a factor that makes you more competitive for this. Summer program and private scholarship applications usually also include a section where you report your scores, right? They need to see your stats. And here, reporting high scores in the SAT will generally boost your chances of admissions. Also, many students question whether they need to take the SAT or the ACT because of test optional policies that many colleges have, which means that you don't have to submit a standardized test score. However, it's not recommended to rely on these policies because many of the top universities, like Harvard, Brown, and Yale, as well as many Texas universities, have since COVID removed the test optional policies because it's been a few years since the pandemic and things are returning back to how they were before. So they're removing test optional, which means that if you want to apply, you have to submit a score. And if you want to have a good chance of admission, it's best to submit a good score. Now, the structure of the SAT is something that's very important to understand. For the new digital SAT, which is used everywhere now, there are 4 sections in total with 98 questions. Of these, there are 2 English modules, each with 27 questions and 32 minutes long, and 2 math modules, each with 22 questions and 35 minutes long. The special thing about the SAT and what makes it differ from the ACT or other standardized tests is that with the new digital version, it's become adaptive, meaning that your performance on the first module of English and math will determine the difficulty of the second module. So, if you have a high score on the first module of English, for example, then the second module you'll receive will be a harder version. Or if you get a lower score on the first module, you'll get generally easier questions on the second module. Now, this was the structure in the old paper SAT, which is no longer available to take, but it's good to know. That also had 4 sections, but it was broken down differently. For reading, there were 52 questions with 65 minutes in total, and the second section was writing, which was 44 questions and 35 minutes in total. Then there were 2 math sections, the first one without a calculator, which was 20 questions and 25 minutes, and the second section was math with a calculator, 38 questions, 55 minutes. Compared with the older paper version, the new version is significantly shorter, but it grants slightly more time per question on average. That means you get overall more time to do each question, and you won't have to sit in the testing center for nearly as long. The scoring of the SAT. Now, the SAT is scored out of 1,600 in total. Of these, half the points, 800, come for English, and half the points, 800, come for math. The score is not determined by a fixed grade boundary. For example, it's not like you have to get 90% of the questions to get a 1500. It's nothing like that. It's not fixed, but it's a curve that can vary by every test, depending on how hard it is and how well people score. In the US, the average SAT score is only 1028, but we believe that with the right strategies and practice, everyone is capable of scoring much higher. Now, what are the differences between the SAT and the ACT, since they're the two most commonly used standardized tests for college? Now, the key difference is that the SAT does not have a science section individually like the ACT does. So there is no section with just science passages and science questions. The ACT is also a much faster test. In the old ACT, you were given 49 seconds per question, and in the new ACT, you were given 58 seconds per question. However, in the SAT, you have 82 seconds per question on average, which is significantly longer. Test takers also usually find that SAT math is easier than the ACT, while English in the SAT is harder. In regards to test dates, SAT has more frequent test dates, around one every month. However, there are none during midsummer, which is July, while the ACT does have one during July. Now, if you want to make a decision between SAT and ACT, then if you know that you're good at language and you want a slower paced test, and you also want to avoid a dedicated science section, then it's recommended you take the SAT. But for many people, it's recommended that you try out both. For example, you can take a practice test for the SAT, take a practice test for the ACT, check out how the questions are, and then make your decision. Because I know many people who have done the SAT first and then found the ACT to be a lot easier and switched to that. But I also know people who find the SAT to be a lot better for them than the ACT. So it really depends on you. Now, understanding the SAT. The key concept about the SAT is that the SAT asks about basic things in very strange but repetitive ways, and it does this because it has to. The SAT is a very special test because College Board makes the SAT to help colleges decide which applicants they want to admit, so it has to provide reliable measurements. Thus, this gives it certain limitations. It can't be overly difficult. For example, it can't include calculus and advanced statistics, or it won't be accessible for most students because most students will not have taken these classes until very late in high school. It also can't rely on arbitrary interpretation, for example, analyzing literature or writing essays, because this would not provide meaningful and standard information that can be compared for everyone. This leads us to the first conclusion, which is that the SAT is forced to test basic ideas in an objective way, rather than testing advanced ideas in a subjective way. Despite the alleged easiness of the material in the SAT, standardized tests also need to find a way to prevent an overwhelming amount of high scores. If they test simple concepts, then many students will have very high scores or near perfect scores, which makes it hard to compare different students and to differentiate high test scorers to low scorers. So, how it prevents this is the SAT combines basic ideas in very unconventional ways to mislead students, so that even though the concepts are easy, the way that they're asked will cause students to make mistakes. However, these ways are repetitive and ultimately predictable. So, the second conclusion is that the key to mastering standardized tests is the ability to look at a new test question and figure out how it follows the rules that all questions of that type follow. So, experience is very important. If you know how to approach questions of a certain type, then all future questions that are similar should not be a problem. The one misconception, this is something I find very important to clear up, which is that the SAT has one and only one correct answer choice for each question. This correct choice is totally, absolutely, undeniably right. It is complete certainty and is beyond disagreement or argument. Now, this is probably common sense to most people, right? SAT is multiple choice. It obviously just has one correct answer, but it's very important to have this concept in your mind at all times. Because if you believe that SAT choices have nuance, This will lead you to be indecisive and unconfident in your answers. This holds the vast majority of test takers back from their true potential, and to progress, you must eliminate that belief. If the SAT has a definitive answer, that means you can find the right answer to every SAT question if you learn what to look for. You can always find the right answer because there is always one answer that is right. This is a source of motivation because it tells us that everybody can do the correct questions and make no mistakes if they know how to approach the questions. Now, also study strategies. Practice, I find, is the best way to improve on the SAT. Practice with also not just with the digital exams, but also the former paper exams on College Board as well, because the question types can be quite similar, and it is just generally good to practice. Now, the tips for practicing is that for exam conditions, do it in exam conditions. So try to take each practice test in one sitting and time each section as you would in the real test. Also, practice smart. Review and correct your mistake afterwards because that's how you learn and improve for the next time. Talking about improvement, draw conclusions, right? See which questions or which areas of knowledge you made a mistake on and conclude what you need to do to improve in the next time you take a practice. Also, be very truthful. Whatever you got is your score, and don't deceive yourself by sugarcoating or by making excuses. Don't say, oh, I should have taken 1 minute longer on that section, or oh, I wasn't paying attention, because that leads the way to neglect, and you don't want to do that. So make sure to look at what score you got, treat that as your actual score, and take it as it is. Understand also that your exam score will likely be 20 to 30 points lower than your practices. That's something that's very normal. Often, many of the official practice tests they provide will be slightly easier than the real test. And also, the thing with the curves in the real test and the flexible grade boundaries makes it hard to predict your score. So be prepared to score around 20 or 30 points lower on the actual test. Now, that is it for this lesson. Visit vikinginitiative.com if you want more AP, IB standardized testing resources. And if you have any questions, feel free to join the SAT group chat and ask our tutors. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.